I was sitting on my sofa in the dark, the only light coming from the muted glow of my television, when a sharp, rhythmic knocking at my apartment door made my heart jump into my throat. It was 11:45 p.m., a Tuesday night, and I certainly wasn't expecting any visitors at an hour when the rest of the building was usually silent and tucked away. I stood up slowly, my bare feet pressing against the cold hardwood floor as I approached the door, squinting through the tiny glass lens of the peephole to see a delivery bag sitting on the floor, but the hallway itself was completely empty. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open just an inch to see a white paper bag from a local Thai place I frequent, with a receipt stapled to the top that clearly listed my name and my exact apartment number. The strange thing was that I hadn't ordered a single thing, and as I picked up the bag, I noticed a handwritten note scrawled in thick, black permanent marker across the front of the receipt. It didn't say, "Enjoy your meal" or "Have a nice night" like a normal service worker might write, but instead, it said in jagged, hurried letters, "Eat up, you'll need the energy for what comes next." I felt a sudden, icy chill wash over me as I pulled the bag inside and locked the deadbolt, my mind racing through every possible explanation, wondering if this was just a sick prank by one of my friends or a delivery driver who had the wrong person. I set the bag on my kitchen counter, staring at it as if it were a live explosive, when my phone suddenly buzzed in my pocket with a notification from an unknown number. The message was just a single photo, and when I opened it, my blood turned to liquid ice because the picture was a clear, high-resolution shot of the back of my head, taken through my living room window just moments ago. I realized with a surge of pure adrenaline that while I had been staring at that bag in the kitchen, someone had been standing on the fire escape, watching me from the darkness of the city night. I scrambled to the window and yanked the heavy curtains shut, my hands shaking so violently that I nearly ripped the fabric from the rod. Who could possibly be doing this, and how long had they been following me to know my favorite food, my address, and the exact layout of my apartment? I retreated into the hallway, the most central part of my home where there were no windows, trying to slow my breathing so I could think clearly about my next move. Just then, the phone buzzed again, a second text message appearing that simply read, "The red shirt looks good on you, but you should really keep the lights on so I can see your face when I finally come inside." I looked down at my chest, seeing the crimson fabric of my pajama top, and realized the person wasn't just outside on the fire escape anymore. They were somewhere with a different vantage point. I began to check every lock in the apartment, moving like a ghost through the shadows, my eyes darting to every corner as I wondered if they had already found a way in while I was distracted by the delivery. I reached the front door again, leaning my forehead against the cool wood, and that's when I heard it. A soft, metallic scraping sound coming from the other side of the door. It wasn't a knock this time, but the unmistakable sound of a metal tool being inserted into the lock cylinder, turning slowly and methodically with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I froze, my breath hitching in my chest, as I watched the deadbolt thumb turn on the inside of the door begin to rotate, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I knew that if I screamed now, I might trigger a violent confrontation before I was ready to defend myself. I sprinted to the kitchen, grabbing the largest chef's knife from the wooden block, the weight of the steel feeling heavy and cold in my palm as I retreated toward the bathroom, which was the only room in the apartment with a solid core door and a secondary interior lock. As I ducked inside and clicked the lock shut, I heard my front door creak open, followed by the heavy, deliberate footsteps of someone wearing boots walking onto my hardwood floor. The intruder didn't rush. They walked with a terrifying slowness, their boots thudding against the floorboards as they moved through the living room, then the kitchen, and finally into the hallway right outside the bathroom door. I sat on the floor with my back against the bathtub, holding the knife in front of me, listening to the sound of my own pulse drumming in my ears like a frantic war tom-tom. Then, the most horrific sound of all broke the silence. The person on the other side of the door began to hum a low, distorted tune, the sound of their voice vibrating through the wood and into my spine. "I know you're in there," a raspy, quiet voice whispered, followed by a gentle tap-tap-tap on the bathroom door that sent fresh waves of terror through my body. "You didn't eat your dinner. That's a waste of good money, don't you think?" I didn't say a word, gripping the knife until my knuckles turned white, praying that the door frame was strong enough to hold if they decided to kick it in. I reached for my phone to call the police, but my heart sank when I saw the signal bars were gone, and a new message was waiting for me that said, "I cut the lines downstairs. No one is coming to help you tonight." The handle of the bathroom door began to jiggle, first softly, and then with increasing violence as the intruder realized I wasn't going to come out willingly. I looked up at the small, narrow ventilation window high up on the bathroom wall, which led to the building's air shaft, and realized it was my only chance of escape. It was a tight squeeze, barely wide enough for a person to fit through, but the sound of the intruder throwing their shoulder against the bathroom door gave me the burst of strength I needed. I climbed onto the toilet tank and then onto the small ledge, shoving the frosted glass pane upward and feeling the cool night air hit my face. Behind me, the wood of the door frame began to splinter with a sickening crack, and I could see the tip of a crowbar wedging its way into the gap. I scrambled through the narrow opening, my skin scraping against the rough brick of the air shaft as I lowered myself onto the narrow metal ledge of the maintenance ladder. I climbed down as fast as I could, the metal cold and slippery under my hands, while above me, I heard the bathroom door finally give way and the sound of heavy boots hitting the tile floor. I reached the bottom of the shaft, which opened out into the dark alleyway behind the building, and I didn't stop running until I reached the bright, neon lights of a 24-hour gas station 3 blocks away. The clerk saw the look of pure horror on my face and the knife still clutched in my hand, and he immediately called the police from the store's landline. When the officers finally arrived and searched my apartment, they found the front door wide open and the Thai food neatly plated on my dining room table, with 2 sets of silverware laid out as if for a dinner date. The intruder was gone, leaving behind nothing but a muddy boot print on my bathroom floor and a final note left on my pillow that simply said, "Next time, I'll bring the wine." I never went back to that apartment again, moving across the state the very next week and changing my name legally. But every time I hear a knock at the door or see a delivery bike pass by, I feel that same cold knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I still wonder if he's out there, checking the menus of local restaurants, waiting for the perfect moment to send me another meal I never ordered. The humming of the tires against the cracked asphalt was the only sound for miles, a lonely, hypnotic rhythm that usually helped me clear my mind, but tonight, it felt like a countdown towards something I couldn't quite name. I had been driving for 6 hours straight, my eyes burning from the glare of oncoming headlights that had long since disappeared as I transitioned from the interstate to this forgotten stretch of back road. I knew I shouldn't have pushed it this far, but the nearest town was still 40 miles away, and the heavy fog rolling in over the hood of my car made it nearly impossible to see more than 10 feet in front of me. When I finally saw the flickering, rusted sign for a rest stop jutting out of the darkness like a jagged tooth, I pulled in with a sigh of relief, desperate for just an hour of shut-eye before the sun came up. I parked in the furthest corner of the lot, tucked away behind a row of overgrown hedges that shielded me from the dim, yellow hum of the single functioning street lamp near the restrooms. I didn't even bother to get out. I just reclined my seat, locked the doors with a double click of the remote, and pulled a fleece blanket up to my chin. The silence of the woods surrounding the lot was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of quiet that seemed to press against the glass of my windows. I was just drifting into that hazy state between wakefulness and sleep when a sound, tiny but sharp, snapped my eyes wide open. It was a slow, methodical peeling sound, like a sticker being pulled off a surface, coming from the rear passenger side of the car. I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs, as I tilted my head just enough to look in the side view mirror. In the pale, sickly light of the moon, I saw a thin, gloved hand pressed against the top of my window frame, the fingers working a small, flat tool under the rubber weather stripping. They weren't trying to smash the glass. They were trying to remove the seal quietly so they could drop the window without making a sound. My breath hitched as I realized there wasn't just one person out there. I saw a second shadow, taller and broader, standing at the front of my car, peering through the windshield with a small, shielded flashlight that cast a dim glow over my dashboard. He couldn't see me clearly because of the angle of my seat, but he was looking for valuables, his movements practiced and calm, as if he did this every single night. I reached down slowly, my hand trembling as I felt for the ignition key, but I knew that if the engine roared to life, they might react with violence before I could put the car in gear. The person at the window stopped peeling the rubber and leaned their face against the glass, trying to see past the tint. I saw the outline of a mask, something crude and handmade from dark fabric, with 2 uneven holes cut out for the eyes. The intruder tapped a single fingernail against the glass, a sharp clink, clink, clink that sounded like a death knell in the cramped space of the car. Then, a low voice drifted through the thin barrier of the door, muffled but chillingly clear. "I think there's someone in this one, Marcus. I see a blanket moving." The shadow at the front of the car stopped and walked around to the driver's side, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel with a deliberate, intimidating slowness. He leaned down, his face inches away from mine, separated only by the window I had locked just minutes before. He didn't try to hide his flashlight anymore. He shined it directly into my eyes, blinding me with a white-hot glare that made me squint and shield my face. "Open the door, friend," he said, his voice surprisingly deep and calm, which somehow made it 10 times more terrifying than if he had been shouting. "We just want the car. You get out, walk toward the woods, and nobody has to get hurt tonight." I knew it was a lie. If I got out of the car in the middle of nowhere with 2 men who were hiding their faces, I would never be seen again. I lunged for the gear shift, but before I could turn the key, the man at my window pulled a heavy, short-handled sledgehammer from his waistband and held it up against the glass, a silent threat that he would shower me in shards of glass if I moved an inch. "Don't be a hero," he warned, the metal head of the hammer tapping softly against the driver's side window. "The locks on this old thing won't hold if I decide to come in. Just unlock it, and we can all go home." My mind was racing, looking for any way out of the metal trap I had built for myself. I noticed that the man with the hammer was standing slightly behind the B-pillar of the car. His weight shifted toward his back foot. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my palms went numb, and in one fluid motion, I slammed the key into the ignition and twisted it. The engine coughed, sputtered for a second that felt like an eternity, and then roared to life. The man with the hammer didn't hesitate. He swung the heavy tool with a guttural grunt of effort, the glass shattering inward in a violent explosion of crystalline fragments that peppered my arms and face. I didn't wait for a second swing. I threw the car into reverse and floored the accelerator, the tires screaming as they grabbed the gravel and launched the car backward. I felt a sickening thud as the back of the car clipped the second man who had been trying to peel the window, sending him spinning into the dirt. The man at my door reached inside through the broken window, his hand clawing at my throat as he tried to grab the steering wheel and pull me out. I felt his fingernails dig into my skin, the smell of stale cigarettes and grease filling the cabin as he hissed a string of curses at me. I slammed the car into drive and jerked the wheel sharply to the left, the centrifugal force throwing his body against the frame of the door until his grip finally slipped. I didn't look back. I drove with the wind howling through the broken window, the glass crunching under my shifting body as I pushed the car to its absolute limit down the dark highway. My face was stinging from dozens of tiny cuts, and my heart was beating so fast I thought it might actually burst through my chest. But I didn't slow down until I saw the blue and red lights of a state trooper parked in a median 5 miles away. When I pulled over and stumbled out of the car, the officer looked at the shattered window and the blood on my shirt with an expression of pure shock. He called for backup and a medical team, but even as they treated my wounds, I couldn't stop looking at the dark tree line behind us. The police eventually found the rest stop empty, but they discovered a pile of discarded license plates and several sets of car keys hidden in the bushes nearby. They told me I was lucky to be alive, that those men had been car shopping for weeks, but they didn't usually leave witnesses behind to tell the story. Now, whenever I'm on a long drive and I feel my eyes getting heavy, I remember the sound of that hammer hitting the glass, and I keep driving until I reach the light. The living room was swallowed in a thick, suffocating ink as the storm outside finally claimed the last of the power lines, leaving me standing in the center of my kitchen with nothing but the fading green glow of my microwave's clock for company until that too flickered and died. I reached for my phone, the screen illuminating my face with a harsh, artificial light that felt exposed in the sprawling darkness of the suburbs. And that was when I heard the first knock. It wasn't the frantic pounding of someone in a life-or-death emergency, but a steady, polite series of raps against the heavy oak of my front door that seemed entirely too calm for a neighborhood currently lashed by gale-force winds and torrential rain. I crept toward the hallway, my heart performing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs, and I peered through the small glass pane to see a man standing on my porch, draped in a yellow raincoat that shimmered under the occasional flash of distant lightning. "Hello?" He called out, his voice muffled by the wood but carrying a tone of deep, neighborly concern that made me hesitate before reaching for the deadbolt. "It's Gary from 2 doors down, the blue house with the wraparound porch. I'm sorry to bother you in this mess, but I was just out checking my gutters when I saw someone. A man in dark clothing, scaling the fence into your backyard." My blood ran cold at the mention of my backyard, which was shielded from the street by a high wooden fence and led directly to the sliding glass doors of my bedroom. I didn't know a Gary from 2 doors down, but in the chaos of a storm, it felt entirely plausible that a neighbor would look out for one another. And the specific detail about the dark clothing sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. "Are you sure?" I shouted back, my hand hovering over the lock, but a nagging instinct in the back of my mind told me to keep the door shut for just a moment longer. I didn't hear anything over the wind. "Are they still back there?" Gary stepped closer to the door, his face obscured by the deep hood of his raincoat, and he gestured vaguely toward the side of my house where the gate was located. He had a crowbar or maybe a large flashlight, I couldn't tell for certain. "He was heading straight for your rear entrance. If I were you, I'd come out here where it's open, or at least let me in so we can call the police together while I keep an eye on the side yard." Something about the way he said, "let me in," felt off. A subtle shift in his cadence that didn't match the urgency of a man who had just witnessed a burglary in progress. I backed away from the door, moving silently into the kitchen to grab a heavy flashlight, and I decided to check the backyard through the window before I made a decision that couldn't be undone. As I pulled back the edge of the kitchen curtain, a flash of lightning illuminated the entire yard for a fraction of a second, revealing a pristine, untouched sheet of rain-slicked grass. There were no footprints in the soft mud near the fence, no shadows lurking by the sliding glass doors, and the gate was still securely latched from the inside, exactly as I had left it. A sickening realization began to settle in my gut as I looked back toward the front door, where the man was still standing, his silhouette perfectly still against the glass. If there was no one in the backyard, then Gary, if that was even his name, wasn't trying to warn me about an intruder. He was trying to create one so that I would unlock the door and let the real threat inside. I realized with a surge of panic that he was playing on my fear, using the false flag tactic to bypass the very locks that were currently keeping me safe. "Gary?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly as I tried to maintain the illusion that I believed him. "I'm looking out the back window now, but I don't see anyone. Are you sure you saw him go over the fence?" There was a long, agonizing silence from the other side of the door, the only sound being the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the roof and the whistling of the wind through the eaves. Finally, the man spoke again, but the neighborly warmth was gone, replaced by a flat, clinical tone that made the hair on my arms stand up. "He's probably hunkered down in the shadows, waiting for you to go back to sleep. You really shouldn't be in there alone with the power out. It makes you a very easy target." The handle of the door turned slowly, the metal clicking as the latch hit the deadbolt, proving that he was testing the strength of the lock while he spoke to me. I didn't answer him this time. Instead, I moved to the hallway closet and grabbed my heavy-duty emergency whistle and the canister of bear spray I kept for hiking trips. I knew that if he managed to break the glass, I would only have a few seconds to react before he was inside the house. I watched the shadow of his feet through the gap at the bottom of the door, seeing him shift his weight as if he were preparing to throw his shoulder against the wood. "I've already called the police, Gary," I lied, my voice booming through the empty hallway with a confidence I didn't truly feel. "They're on their way now, and they said they have a cruiser just 2 blocks over." You should probably go back to your house before they get here and start asking questions." The shadow stayed perfectly still for several heartbeats, and for a moment, I thought he might actually leave. But then I heard a low, raspy chuckle that sent a fresh wave of terror through my chest. "Nice try," he whispered, his mouth clearly pressed right against the wood of the door. "But I cut the phone lines at the junction box 10 minutes ago, and I know your cell service is spotty in this storm. No one is coming, and we both know it." My heart sank as I looked at my phone and saw the dreaded "no service" icon glowing in the corner of the screen. He was right. I was completely cut off, and he was standing between me and the only exit to the street. Suddenly, the gentle knocking turned into a violent, booming kick that shook the entire door frame, the wood groaning under the impact. He wasn't pretending anymore. I ran to the living room and grabbed the heavy coffee table, dragging it across the floor with a screeching sound that set my teeth on edge, and I wedged it firmly against the front door. Another kick followed, then another, the glass pane in the door finally shattering inward and showering the hallway in jagged shards. I saw a gloved hand reach through the broken glass, groping blindly for the deadbolt, but the coffee table was blocking his path, preventing him from getting enough leverage to turn the thumb latch. I didn't wait for him to try again. I knew the backyard gate was locked from the inside, and if I could make it over the fence, I could reach the neighbor's house behind me, who I knew kept a guard dog and a landline that might still be working. I sprinted to the sliding glass door in my bedroom, slid it open just enough to slip through, and plunged into the freezing rain. I scrambled over the wooden fence, the splinters digging into my palms, and I didn't stop running until I was pounding on the back door of the house behind mine. The neighbor, an older man named Mr. Henderson, opened the door with a shotgun in his hand, his eyes wide with confusion until he saw the state I was in. He let me in and called the police, who arrived 20 minutes later to find my front door hanging off its hinges and the yellow raincoat discarded on my lawn. The man was gone, but the police found a roll of duct tape and a heavy set of zip ties sitting on my kitchen counter, along with a note scrawled on the back of a grocery receipt that simply said, "You're faster than you look." I stayed at a hotel for the next month, and even now, 2 years later, I never answer the door after dark, no matter how much the person on the other side sounds like a concerned neighbor. I realized that night that the most dangerous people aren't always the ones hiding in the shadows. Sometimes, they're the ones standing right in the light, telling you exactly what you want to hear just to get you to open the door.